So when we say a blackbird, right? Notice we're not saying, oh, look, a black bird. We're saying a blackbird. You can hear that in the intonation, right? In French, notice it's going to be one word. We're just going to say un merle. I think it's M-E-R-L-E, comme le merle moqueur. And notice we only have one word because we're only referring to one thing. And also when we say, we're talking about a sort of a type of a bird, right? And that means, first of all, the stress pattern reflects that we're only really referring to one thing, essentially referring to one thing. The stress pattern is going to be, if I say un merle, right? I'm not pronouncing that very well, right? It's not really far from un corbeau, for example, right? That stress pattern in which the first element receives primary stress, the second element secondary stress, right? That reflects the fact that these words are no longer independent in meaning, right? They form what we call a compound, right? So that's the essential, I would say, way that compounds work, right? There are two parts that are originally words, right? That become associated, right? And the normal stress pattern for this is going to be that the first word is going to be stressed, will receive primary stress, which is indicated by R1, and the second word will receive secondary stress, which is indicated by R2, right? And the fact that, if you remember, we said that usually one primary stress refers to one unit of meaning. Since we only have a secondary stress in that second element, right? What we're saying is there's only one overarching meaning in this word. There's only kind of one main meaning, right? Even though, and this also means that this adjective, right, black, no longer is descriptive. It's no longer describing the bird as black, right? It will be, and that also means we have a fixed association, right? We're not going to say a green bird, right, or a red bird, right? En français, vous avez un rouge-gorge, je pense, right? Okay, but you're not going to say, regardez un orange-gorge. Ça n'a pas de sens. Donc, tout ça pour dire que avec les composés, when I say compounds, I'm talking about des noms composés, hein, il s'agit d'une association fixe. Ce n'est pas le locuteur qui l'invente, et du coup qui deviennent figés, d'accord? Et du coup, ça devient un seul mot en quelque sorte. So there are a few other things that I want to say. Notice that something to be mindful of, and that is not altogether obvious, is that compounds, as we said, they're a fixed association. And in this case, it might not be apparent. There is no space. I'm talking about a typographical space. Autrement dit, c'est collé. D'accord? Je n'ai pas de tiret, je n'ai pas d'espace typographique, right? So there is no, even though we have two words, there is no space between them, right? This can happen in compounds, and it is often believed that there is a sort of a process where over time that is sort of the way that compounds tend. For example, the word weekend in French, I think officially, so this word is not really, people who are adepts of the Académie Française are going to say that we should say fin de semaine, but weekend we're going to have a dash between them. We're going to have a hyphen, I should say, between them, right? Whereas in English, there is going to be no space, so that will be, as we say, collé in French. Okay, so I'll just like to show you there are other examples of compounds where there might be a space or a hyphen. There are the three possibilities. Here we have blackbird, right, where there is no space or hyphen, but there can be other examples where we have a space or a hyphen. I could say, I'm thinking of a good example, something like long-necked. That's an example of a hyphenated compound. Or I could say a train station. That is an example of a compound with a space, right? So here are the three possibilities. Blackbird, where there is no space or hyphen. Long-necked with a hyphen, and train station with a space in between both words. So, but the important thing to notice is all three of these are compounds, right? And in all three cases, we have two words: black is a word, bird is a word, long is a word, neck is a word, train is a word, and station is a word, that are grouped together, right? Okay, and we're going to notice actually long neck we're going to see that that's an exception for another reason, right? But it's important to notice that one of these words will receive primary stress and the other one secondary stress. Now the normal pattern, right, and I'm going to give it, is going to be that the first, I say word, right, because it's sort of, we could say first element, which is originally word, will receive primary stress, and the second element receives secondary stress. So this leads us to another point, if we're going to really look in a detailed way how a train station is stressed. First of all, you can hear it. I don't say a train station, a train station, right? Train station, right? And there is very often, this is reflected in the pitch, not only intensity. So if I'm going to write the stress pattern for this word, right? In a way that reflects the way I just said it, train station, right? And if we look at this, we can probably better understand sort of the stress pattern in what we might call the hierarchy between these two words. Once, just like in Blackbird, the first element receives primary stress. Black receives primary stress in Blackbird, and train receives primary stress in train station. So we have the same thing going on. And it's sort of just a merely formal character. It doesn't really matter that much as far as pronunciation is concerned. It doesn't matter at all, actually, as far as pronunciation is concerned, whether there is a space or not between the two words, right? Now, the difference here is that notice here we have the second element, right? Bird, that is monosyllabic. There's only one syllable there, right? So we don't really have to ask ourselves questions. We just say, oh, it will receive secondary stress, right? And we notice that usually it would be a lexical word that receives primary stress. So there's been what we might think of as a sort of a demotion. In the second element, right, under the normal stress pattern, meaning that the second element receives secondary stress, the syllable that receives primary stress receives secondary stress, right? Okay. And that is what is happening in bird. Bird usually receives primary stress when it's a lexical word, right? And that primary stress is demoted to secondary stress, right? And that's what's going on here in the second compound, a train station. Here our second element is station, right? And normally in another context, right, if station was not a part of this compound, a train station, it would receive primary stress. We could say he's at the station, right? Okay. But here, because it's part of a compound, the syllable that receives primary stress receives secondary stress, which means that when looking at compounds, you have to be mindful of the stress pattern of the original word, right? It would be really, I would say ridiculous, but it would be very strange, right? If we were to change the stress pattern of the original word. For example, station, we know the stress pattern of station is going to be 1-O because we have our ION type ending, right? Our ION type ending assigns stress on the syllable before, or if you were the penultimate syllable. So this primary stress would normally be on station, right? But here, it still is on station, but that syllable, stay, right, that receives primary stress will receive secondary stress because it's a part of a compound, right? So that is what we might call sort of the normal stress pattern for compounds, or the basic stress pattern, meaning the primary stress is applied to the first element and secondary stress to the second element, right? And also sort of the way you recognize a compound. And once again, compounds are not something that you invent, right? Meaning, we have a train station here, right? Now notice we can also have like a bus station, right? There's also a space station, right? But I don't have like a chair station. I'm looking around my room, what I have here. I don't have a lamp station. I'm not going to say a wall station, right? So these are kind of what we call fixed associations, and we can find them in dictionaries, right? And once again, very often they're susceptible to correspond to one word in French. For example, a train station is just going to be une gare, because we're really referring to one thing, right? Train is indicating what kind of station we're referring to. And once again, the fact that we're only really referring to one thing, right, means that in the compound, only one syllable, one, will receive primary stress, right? And that is why there is a sort of a subordinate nature in Warn's stress. So I hope that's fairly clear. That's sort of the general picture of what's going on with this. We're going to do a final, we'll have a third installation to describe exceptions. There are exceptions. But I would, in a sense, really take this in, make sure you understand I would say the basic way that this works before considering exceptions. But if, by the way, I mean, to be honest, if you understand the rule, it's much better to spend most of your time making sure that you're square with the rule, right? Before you go on to make sure you're really at home with that before looking at the exception. So it might even be a good idea just to maybe tomorrow learn this, review it, and then tomorrow you can look at the following section, the third part on the exceptions. Okay, so thank you.